Hello, ladies and gents. Welcome to video 4 of Bannockburn Month. This is going to be our shaky cam on location video here, because today, as promised, and somewhat later than anticipated, we are going to be having a think about the landscape here at Bannockburn and how Bruce designs the battlefield, how he comes up with a plan here at Bannockburn to overcome this English army that he knows is on the way. Now that water that you can see behind me there, hopefully it's focusing in there, that is the Bannockburn itself. I'm standing down here at Milton Ford, which is the main crossing point of the Bannockburn in 1314. If you were approaching Stirling from the south, the Bannockburn normally is what you would have to cross. And so Bruce in 1314 has placed his army, has prepared to make his stand just up the road from us in the new park. This was a hunting park built or enclosed in the 1260s for Alexander III, a royal hunting park designed to service the castle at Stirling. Bruce has actually been training his men on the other side of the burn, down there in an area called the Torwood, an area of woodland between Falkirk and Stirling, and ending before the Bannockburn. But on the day before the battle, the 22nd of June 1314, Bruce pulls his army back here just up the road into the new park. Okay, now the reason for that is tied into this ford, because if the English are going to come and get Bruce back there at the new park, they are going to have to get across this ford, and as you can see, it is not especially wide at all. I'm going to turn you around, folks, so you can see that a little bit more clearly. The English are going to have to get across here, and in all likelihood they are not going to be able to get across here more than maybe 3 or 4 men abreast. Even that is probably a bit generous. So this is going to funnel the English down into a pretty narrow space, pretty small space they're going to have to squeeze their way through in order to get across the Bannockburn down here. And Bruce has prepared on either side of the road going up into Stirling. Once the English get across this burn, they are going to find, probably not particularly well hidden even, honeycombed pits filled with sharpened stakes on either side of the road that are going to keep the English funneled into that narrow column, so that when they hit Bruce's army back there in the new park, back up the road, they are only going to be able to fight Bruce's men on a little tight, narrow front. Okay, and that's going to suit the Scots, because the Scots have maybe about 5 to 7,000 men, rather, maybe significantly fewer than that. The English have anywhere between about 18 and 20,000, maybe a few more than that. So the Scots are outnumbered here at least 2 to 1, maybe closer to 3 to 1. So Bruce is going to use the ford here, and he's going to use those pits and traps that he's dug either side of the ford, on the north side of the ford, to make sure that the English can only hit them on a very narrow, very limited front, where their numbers aren't going to count for anything. Okay? Now, Bruce can't beat the English army like that. He can't just let them come up, you know, a few hundred men at a time and gradually kill them, you know, in those tiny bite-sized chunks. And Edward's not gonna throw his army, even though he desperately needs to get at Bruce here. Remember, we talked about that in our first video. He's not just going to send his men, 3 or 4 men at a time, just to die needlessly along the front line of the Scottish army. What that is going to do, what those traps are going to do, what funneling the English into that bottleneck is going to do, is going to make the whole army, it's going to force the whole of the army to try and find a way around those traps, to try and find a way to get at Bruce in significant numbers. Okay? Now this is where Bruce's plan gets really clever. Okay? The English from here can go left or right. If they can't get across the stream here and do serious damage to Bruce, they're going to have to go back across the stream, and then they are going to either have to head west that way, or they're going to have to go east that way. Now if they go west, they are going to run afoul of some very dry ground. The land going west from where the new park is slopes away, gets very wet, rises up again to a place called Gillies Hill. So if the English are going to try and get around into the west, they're either going to have to slog their way through the wet ground, or they're going to have to try and go over the hill. That's going to slow them down, might make them vulnerable to counterattacks, but it might also provoke Bruce just to go, just to up sticks and flee. And remember, the most important thing for Edward here, oops, sorry, I'm shaking the camera around a bit doing that, for my emphasis there. The most important thing for Edward is that he needs to get his hands on Bruce. Remember, it's a kind of a legal army that he's brought up here. He's going to be in a lot of trouble with Parliament, a lot of trouble with his rivals back home, particularly Thomas, Earl of Lancaster. He's going to be in even more trouble if he gets back and he has to reveal that actually he's spent all this money, he's spent all this time, he's maybe lost a few men to disease, and you know, skirmishing with Bruce here at the mouth of the new park, and he's accomplished nothing. He needs to get his hands on Bruce if he's going to justify having undertaken this campaign. So, much more likely, Edward is going to go east. Now, if he goes east from here, you can't really see from where we are now, but as the Bannockburn moves east from here, it cuts a deep ditch into the ground at places about 40 feet from the ridgeline down to the water's edge. So for about a mile, mile and a half to the east here, the English army are not going to be able to get across. This big, heavy, slow-moving English army with all of its horses, all of its carts, all of its supplies and so forth. So they're going to have to go a decent way to the east to get across the Bannockburn here. But after that great ditch, the ground becomes much more level, becomes much more flat, and the English can then pass into an area known as the Carse, a wide flat area between two streams. You'll sometimes hear it referred to in accounts of the battle as being wet, boggy ground. That's not actually true, ladies and gents. We're going to look at where that idea of the English getting across the Bannockburn into boggy ground comes from in probably in the, well, one of the two anniversary day videos anyway, probably the first one, I suppose. Anyway, it's not boggy ground, it's kind of meadowland, maybe useful for grazing, that sort of stuff. Not really useful for growing crops on, anything like that. But it is bounded on the south side by the Bannockburn and on the north side by another shallow stream, the Pell stream. So those two streams flow together and eventually join the River Forth. They flow together in a V shape. Okay. Now, if the English do head down to the east and do decide to cross the Bannockburn down there where the ground is a little bit flatter, then they are quite likely to decide to camp in that little V shape, okay? Because down in that confluence between the two streams, they are protected overnight on all but one side from any Scottish raiding, and on the second day of battle, when they get their opportunity to act again, they can either head east and attack the Scots from the east up a relatively gentle slope known as Balquiderick Ridge, or they can cross the Pell stream, get onto the northern side of the Pell stream, cut Bruce off not just from the castle, but more importantly from his escape route. Remember, if Bruce is going to escape from the battlefield here, he can't really escape south. That's back into enemy territory. Friendly territory really is northwards from here, probably northwest up into the Lennox, where, if you recall, we looked at Bruce going to hide when Edward came into Scotland the last time he brought an army into Scotland in 1310. So, English army quite likely, if they can't muscle their way through the Scots here at the new park, which Bruce's pits and traps are hopefully going to stop them doing, then they are most likely to head east, cross the Bannockburn where the ground is a little bit flatter, and camp on that nice flat meadowland between the two streams. And this Robert Bruce seems to have anticipated. Now, if that happens, if Bruce can use those pits and traps to force Edward around into the Carse, he has him where he wants him. Because he has Edward now in an area that is quite tight, quite narrow, not unlike the bottleneck that Bruce has created down where we are now with his pits and his traps. So, if rather than letting Edward cross the Pell stream to cut him off from his retreat, Bruce off from his retreat that is, or letting Edward come up and attack the Scots in the New Park from the east, if instead of any of that, Bruce on the second day of battle decides to bring his army down into the Carse where it's too narrow and too tight for the English to use their superior numbers against the Scots, Bruce might actually be able to inflict a defeat on an army that is at least twice his size, maybe 3 times his size, and maybe he might even be able to do something so outrageous as to kill or capture Edward II, his rival king. So that is Bruce's plan on the 23rd and the 24th of June in 1314. He's going to create an artificial bottleneck down here, using the ford to his advantage and digging traps on either side of the road on the north side of the ford. He's going to funnel the English into a tight space here, drive them back from the mouth of the New Park, force them around into the east, and then when he's got them down there in the Carse, in that narrow space between the two streams, he's going to go for them. He's going to put everything he's got in there that after them, going to send everybody he has down there to squeeze the English into that tight narrow space between the two streams and hopefully carve their way through that English army to get their hands on King Edward, capture him or kill him. Capture would be better. They can try and ransom him back. The price, of course, being recognition of Bruce as the rightful king. But if Edward dies, that's pretty good for the Scots too. Political crisis in England makes the English much more likely to accept a fundamentally pro-Scottish peace deal. So that's the plan, ladies and gents. We are going to come back on Sunday, the 23rd of June, to see how well that plan worked out for Bruce. So, thank you very much for indulging me here, ladies and gentlemen. I hope this hasn't been too shaky and nausea-inducing as I've been switching hands and wiggling my hands around to make points, as is my wont. I will see you, ladies and gents, on Sunday for the first day of the Battle of Bannockburn. Thank you.